They say doctors shouldn't get emotionally involved. But they never tell you how to stop your heart from beating faster when someone walks in, from breaking when they leave. Chicago winters are brutal. But the ER never sleeps. Neither do its doctors. Or their secrets. I was on hour 16 of my shift. When everything changed. When he walked in. With chaos in his wake. Multiple trauma coming in. The nurse's voice cut through my exhaustion. As ambulance sirens screamed outside. Through the Chicago snow. I didn't know then. That this was the moment. That would change everything. The paramedic burst through the doors. Blood on his uniform. Fire in his eyes. 7-year-old girl, car crash. Parents DOA at scene. His voice was steady. Professional. But something in it made me look twice. He was young. Younger than me. With eyes too old for his beautiful face. "I'm Mike," he said. As we worked together. Saving the girl who'd lost everything. I noticed his hands. Strong but gentle. As he helped transfer her to the trauma bay. "Dr. Chen," I replied. Too late. Too breathless. Too aware. We saved her that night. Together. In that dance of medicine. Where seconds count. And hearts race. For all the right reasons. I didn't think about David. My husband in name only. Chief of surgery. Living in his perfect penthouse. While I stayed in our old apartment. Trying to remember. Why we'd married. Why we'd failed. Mike brought more traumas. More emergencies. More moments where our eyes met. Over broken bodies we tried to fix. He didn't know I was married. Didn't know about David. Didn't know I was supposed to be above his station. The nurses noticed first. How he lingered after handoffs. How I smiled more on his shifts. How something was changing. "He's too young," they whispered. Too blue collar. Not your type. As if they knew my type. As if I knew anymore. The night it started snowing. He brought me coffee. After a brutal trauma. "You looked cold," he said. But his eyes said more. As our fingers brushed over the paper cup. Making me shiver. We started talking then. About more than patience. About life and dreams. About everything and nothing. He'd been a Marine. Before becoming a paramedic. Had seen too much death. Wanted to save lives instead. I told him about medical school. About my Chinese parents' expectations. About marrying the chief's son. About losing myself. He listened without judgment. With those eyes that saw too much. That made me feel seen. For the first time in years. The night shift became our time. Between emergencies. Between heartbeats. Between right and wrong. David rarely came to the ER. Too busy in his surgical tower. With his perfect procedures. And controlled environment. But he heard the whispers. About his wife. And the young paramedic. Who made her smile. "You're being talked about," he warned. During one of our cold dinners. When he bothered to come home. To the apartment he'd left. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. But couldn't meet his eyes. Couldn't admit the truth. Even to myself. The snow got worse. But the ER got busier. More traumas. More moments with Mike. Until the night of the pileup. When everything exploded. Like the cars on the icy highway. Like my careful control. Mike brought them in waves. Covered in blood and snow. Working past exhaustion. Never losing focus. We worked side by side. For hours that felt like minutes. Saving those we could. Losing those we couldn't. When it was over. When the last patient was stable. When the adrenaline crashed. I found him in the ambulance bay. Sitting alone. Snow in his hair. Looking too young. Too vulnerable. You okay? I asked. Sitting beside him. Close enough to feel his warmth. Far enough to pretend. No, he said honestly. But I will be. Thanks to you. Making me look at him. The snow fell between us. Like moments we couldn't catch. Like feelings we couldn't name. Like truth we couldn't hide. Dr. Chen, he started. Emma, I corrected. Before I could stop myself. Before I could remember why I should. Emma, he repeated. Like a prayer. Like a sin. Like everything. I knew I should leave. Should maintain distance. Should remember my position. My marriage. My life. Instead, I stayed. As snowflakes melted. On his eyelashes. You're shivering, he noticed. Taking off his jacket. Wrapping it around me. His scent surrounding me. Mike, I whispered. Warning or invitation? I wasn't sure which. Until his hand found mine. Warm despite the cold. Strong despite the gentleness. Wrong despite feeling so right. We sat there in silence. Holding hands in the snow. While Chicago slept. And my heart woke up. The next shift changed everything. Another trauma, another rush. But this time when our hands touched. Passing surgical instruments. The electricity couldn't be ignored. Couldn't be denied. Couldn't be forgotten. Coffee after, he asked. When the patient was stable. When we were alone. When pretense was thin. I should have said no. Should have remembered my ring. Should have been stronger. Instead, I said yes. We found a quiet diner. Away from the hospital. Away from watching eyes. Away from reality. He told me about Afghanistan. About losing friends. About finding purpose. In saving others. I told him about my marriage. About expectations and duty. About loving the idea. More than the man. Why do you stay? He asked. Voice soft in the dawn light. Making me question. Everything. It's complicated, I said. But it wasn't really. Just fear and habit. And Chinese daughter duty. His hand found mine across the table. Warm and sure. Like his eyes when they met mine. Making promises we couldn't keep. Nothing's complicated, he said. When it's right. Making my heart race. Making me believe. The affair began like that. In stolen moments between traumas. In supply closet kisses. In touches that lingered too long. We were careful at first. Professional in public. But passion has a way of spilling over. The nurses knew, but kept our secret. Understanding about love. That couldn't be timed. David was too busy to notice. Or pretended not to. Until the night he came to the ER. And saw what everyone else saw. The way Mike looked at me. Like I was everything. The way I smiled back. Like I was finally alive. In my ER, he said later. Voice cold as Chicago winter. With a paramedic. Making class a curse. There's nothing going on, I lied. But my voice shook. Giving away secrets. I'd tried to keep. Don't insult me, he snapped. Or your family's reputation. Playing the culture card. He knew would hurt. But I was tired. Of reputation. Of duty. Of pretending. Maybe I don't care anymore. The words slipped out. True and terrifying. And liberating. His face hardened. Into the surgeon's mask. He wore in the OR. When cutting things out. He'll lose his job. Not a threat. A promise. A surgeon's precision. My heart stopped. Started. Stopped again. Knowing he could do it. We're done, I whispered. Have been for months. Just make it official. But he was already gone. Mike found me crying. In the on-call room. Where I'd fled. To hide my breakdown. Hey, he said softly. Sitting beside me. Not touching. But close enough. I told him everything. About David's threats. About family pressure. About choosing between worlds. I won't let him hurt you, he said. Like the soldier he'd been. Ready to fight. For what mattered. He can't hurt me, I replied. Only your career. And I won't let that happen. Breaking both our hearts. My career doesn't matter, he insisted. Taking my face in his hands. Making me look at him. See the truth there. You matter. Us matters. Everything else is just details. Making me believe. When his lips found mine. It felt like coming home. Like truth. Like finally choosing right. But morning brought reality. In the form of my mother's call. Speaking rapid Mandarin. About duty and face. About the shame of divorce. About everything I'd been taught. To put above love. Above self. Mike waited for my decision. Patient as always. Strong as always. Loving as always. While I fought my battle. Between two worlds. Between head and heart. Between duty and love. The hospital held its breath. Waiting to see. Which would break first. My marriage or my heart. The annual hospital gala arrived. Like a deadline. For decisions I couldn't make. Choices I couldn't face. I wore red. Against tradition. Against expectation. Against my mother's wishes. David came separately. Playing perfect chief. While whispers followed. About our failing marriage. Mike was there too. In a borrowed tuxedo. Looking more handsome. Than any man had right to. He was working, technically. Part of the medical team. Required to be present. In case of emergency. But his eyes found me. Across the crowded room. Making my heart race. Making me forget pretense. David noticed. Of course he did. Surgeon's precision. Missing nothing. He approached Mike. Glass in hand. Smile sharp as scalpels. Intent to cut. I moved without thinking. Through designer dresses. Past hospital politics. To stop what was coming. But I was too late. Quite a step up, David said. Loud enough to draw attention. From ambulance to ballroom. Mike stood straight. Military bearing. Not backing down. Not showing pain. Some of us prefer saving lives. To playing politics. Making the crowd gasp. Making me proud. David's smile turned cruel. Some of us earned our place. Instead of sleeping our way in. The room went silent. I reached them as Mike tensed. Ready to fight. For my honor. For our love. Enough, I said. Voice steady and strong. Drawing every eye. Making my choice. You want to talk about earning place? Facing my husband. In front of everyone. Finally speaking truth. Let's talk about your father. Making you chief at 35. About family connections. About real merit. David's face darkened. As I continued. Unable to stop. Now that I'd started. Mike saves lives every day. Without recognition. Without praise. Because it matters. He loves what he does. Not what it brings him. Loves with his whole heart. Not his reputation. The crowd watched. As I destroyed. Years of pretense. Of perfect marriage. I want a divorce, I said. Finally. Freely. Feeling light. David stared. Like he'd never seen me. Maybe he hadn't. Until now. You'll regret this, he said. But his power was gone. His threats empty. Against my truth. I turned to Mike. Who looked at me. Like I was everything. Like I was enough. Take me home, I whispered. Not caring who heard. Not caring what they thought. Not caring about anything. Except his smile. As he took my hand. Leading me out. Into the snow. My phone exploded later. With messages from family. With cultural shame. With expectations broken. But I didn't care. Couldn't care. Wrapped in Mike's arms. Finally home. The hospital adjusted. To new realities. To changed dynamics. To truth exposed. David moved to Boston. Taking his power plays. His family connections. His empty success. My mother didn't speak to me. For 3 months. Until she saw me with Mike. Saw how he loved me. Saw how I glowed. With real happiness. With real love. With real life. The ER remained. With its traumas. Its emergencies. Its moments of grace. Where Mike and I still worked. Saving lives together. Loving together. Living truth together. They say doctors shouldn't get emotionally involved. But sometimes involvement is the only cure. For a heart that stopped. For a life half-lived. For love that waits. In Chicago snow. End.